The clock on the mantel had stopped at 11 minutes past 2, though neither of us noticed until morning. I remember the little brass pendulum hanging still behind the glass and the smell of rain coming through the cracked kitchen window. My wife sat across from me with both hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold. She had something to tell me, I could see that much. What I did not know was that she had been carrying it for nearly half our marriage. My name is Mahalan. I have been Amish all my life, and I have worked the same ground since I was old enough to hold a hoe without dragging it behind me. I'm a husband, a father, and now a grandfather many times over. I tell these stories because age gives a man a longer view, though it does not always give him a second chance. Before I go further, I would like you to think about one thing. Have you ever learned the truth too late to change what came before it? You can tell me in the comments if you are willing. My wife's name was Ruth. When I speak of her now, I still see her as she was in the middle years. Not young exactly, but strong. Her sleeves rolled to the elbow in the summer kitchen, a flour mark along one cheek, hair pinned tight, though 2 strands always escaped near her ears before noon. She had a way of moving quietly without seeming timid. A person could spend an hour in the same room with Ruth and hear little from her, yet feel that she had noticed everything. We had been married 51 years by the night she told me. 51 years is enough time for 2 people to know the sound of each other's footsteps from another room. Enough time to tell whether a cupboard door was closed in anger or only by a draft. Enough time to know which side of the bed the other person would reach toward when waking from a bad dream. At least that is what I believed. That evening had begun like many others. Rain had settled over the farm before supper. Not a hard rain, just a steady summer rain that darkened the fence posts and made the yard smell of wet earth and old wood. I had come in from checking the lower field, my trousers damp to the knee, and Ruth had left a towel near the door as she always did. We ate potato soup and bread. She did not take much. I asked whether her stomach was troubling her. She said no. After supper, she washed the bowls. I dried them. That had become our habit once the children were grown. When we were younger, I believed the kitchen belonged to her and the barn belonged to me. Age corrected some of that foolishness, not all of it, but some. She set the last bowl in the cupboard and stood there with her hand resting on the wooden door. Her back was turned to me. "Malin," she said, "there is something I should have told you long ago." That was the only full sentence she spoke for several minutes. I remember placing the dish towel on the table. I folded it once, then again, though there was no reason to fold it at all. A man does small things with his hands when he senses that his life is about to shift. We sat down. The lamp was low. Rain tapped the window over the sink. Somewhere in the wall, a mouse scratched once and went quiet. Ruth looked older to me in that moment than she had the day before, not because her face had changed, but because something she had held inside was finally showing its weight. She told me that when our second child, Samuel, was born, she had fallen into a darkness she did not understand. We did not have words for such things then. Sadness was sadness, weakness was weakness. A woman had a healthy child, food in the pantry, a husband who worked, and a church around her. What reason could she have to feel empty? That was how people thought. That was how I thought. Samuel was born in late February. Snow had gathered against the north side of the house, nearly to the bottom of the windows. The bedroom smelled of boiled cloth, lamp oil, and the sharp metal scent that follows birth. I remember holding him for the first time. His face was red and folded, and one of his hands opened and closed against my thumb. I was proud. That is the plain truth. Proud of the boy, proud of Ruth, proud that our family was growing as families were expected to grow. What I did not see was that Ruth was frightened of being left alone with him. She told me that some mornings she would wake before dawn and feel no love at all, not anger, not hatred, nothing. She would hear Samuel stirring in the cradle and feel as though the sound came from another house. Then shame would come over her so hard that she could barely breathe. She had wanted to tell me. More than once she had tried. The first time was 3 weeks after his birth. I had come into the kitchen for breakfast before going to help my brother repair a wagon wheel. Ruth stood by the stove in her nightdress with a shawl around her shoulders. She said she did not think she was well. I remembered that morning when she told me. I had not remembered it for 50 years, but then it returned complete. The frost along the lower pane, the smell of coffee, the way she kept pressing her thumbnail into the edge of the shawl. I told her she was tired. I said all women were tired after a baby. Then I left. I do not say that to make myself sound crueler than I was. I say it because that is what happened. The second time Samuel was nearly 2 months old. Ruth began crying while she was mending one of my shirts. I asked what was wrong. She said she was afraid she might disappear inside herself and never come back. I laughed softly, not because I found it amusing, but because I did not understand what else to do. I told her she was speaking foolishly. I reminded her that she had work, children, and faith. I said a person could not disappear when there was so much to keep her busy. Then I asked whether the shirt would be ready by Sunday. A man can live a long time without knowing which sentence his wife never forgot. That was the sentence she never forgot. Ruth told me that after that day, she stopped trying to explain. She performed the life in front of her. She fed Samuel. She rocked him. She sang hymns when he cried. She smiled when women came to visit. She stood beside me at church. By summer, the worst of the darkness lifted, though it returned in smaller ways after our next 2 children were born. She never told me again, not then. Years passed. Samuel grew into a broad-shouldered boy who could stack hay faster than I could by 16. Our daughters married. Our youngest son took over more of the field work. We became grandparents. The house filled and emptied in seasons. From the outside, ours looked like a good marriage. In many ways, it was. We did not shout much. We did not keep separate money. We prayed together. We worked beside each other. When my father died, Ruth sat awake with me until sunrise, saying almost nothing. When she lost her sister, I handled the chores for 2 weeks and made the children keep the house quiet. We had loyalty, we had endurance, we had 1,000 ordinary kindnesses, but there was a room in our marriage that Ruth had locked, and I had helped her build the door. The truth she told me that night was not only about the darkness after Samuel was born, it was about what happened afterward. She said she had spent the rest of our marriage measuring her words before speaking them to me. Not every word, not every day, but the words that mattered most. When she was afraid, she first asked herself whether I would call the fear foolish. When she was exhausted, she asked whether I would tell her everyone was tired. When she disagreed with a decision, she asked whether peace in the home required her silence. I had believed Ruth was naturally quiet. She told me some of that quiet had been learned. There is no easy way for an old man to hear that. I wanted to defend myself. The defense rose in me before she finished speaking. I had never struck her. I had never abandoned her. I had brought my wages home. I had worked when I was ill. I had remained faithful. I had sat beside her through sickness. I had done what I understood a husband should do. All of that was true. It was also not the whole truth. A person can be dependable and still be difficult to reach. A man can provide shelter and still make honesty feel unsafe. He can believe he is protecting the peace when he is only protecting himself from discomfort. I asked Ruth why she was telling me then. She looked toward the dark window. The lamp reflected her face back at us, faint and yellow in the glass. She had been to see the doctor in town that week. There was something wrong with her heart, not the kind of wrong that could be fixed easily. The doctor had spoken carefully, but Ruth understood him. She might have a year, perhaps less. She did not want to die with the door still locked. I remember reaching across the table. She let me take her hand, but she did not squeeze mine. That hurt more than if she had pulled away. I asked her whether she had loved me. It was a selfish question. I know that now. She had just trusted me with the pain of half a century, and I asked her to comfort me. Still, she answered. I loved you enough to stay, she said. I only wish I had trusted you enough to speak. That was her one line. The line that has remained with me longer than any sermon I ever heard. We sat there until the lamp burned low. I apologized, not once, but many times. At first, the words came too quickly. I told her I had not known. I told her I would have helped if I had understood. I told her I was young and foolish then. I told her the whole community had thought the same way. Ruth listened. Then she said that not knowing was part of the wound. I had lived beside her, slept beside her, watched her carry children, bury parents, endure illness and age. Yet I had not known because I had not made enough room to know. That is a hard truth. It does not soften simply because a man is sorry. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Water dripped from the eaves. The clock still showed 11 minutes past 2. I wound it and set the time, though I cannot explain why that seemed important. Ruth made oatmeal. I sliced apples into it. We moved around each other slowly, like people entering a familiar room after the furniture has been rearranged. I wanted to fix our marriage in one morning. Old habits make a man impatient for repair. We spend years causing a thing, then hope one honest conversation will undo it. I began asking questions, too many at first. Was there anything else she had hidden? Had she ever wanted to leave? Had I failed her in other ways? Had she been unhappy all along? She grew tired. I could see it. So I stopped. That may have been the first useful thing I did. Over the next months we spoke in pieces, not every day. Ruth did not wish to spend the end of her life studying my failures. She wanted to sit on the porch. She wanted to see the beans put up. She wanted to hear our grandchildren read. She wanted the blue quilt finished for our eldest granddaughter. But when she did speak, I listened differently. I learned that there had been a winter 15 years into our marriage when she had wanted me to decline a church responsibility because our family was already stretched thin. She never said so because I had seemed proud to be asked. I learned that she had once considered writing to her cousin in Ohio and staying there for a few weeks simply to rest. She decided against it because she feared I would see the request as disloyal. I learned that when our daughter Miriam was shunned for a time after leaving the community, Ruth had disagreed with how firmly I closed the door. She had obeyed the decision in public, then cried in the pantry where no one could hear. That one was difficult to bear. Miriam had returned years later. We had repaired what we could. But there are choices a father makes in certainty that look very different when remembered in old age. I began to understand that Ruth's silence had not been one thing. It had been made of many small moments. A dismissed fear, a quick answer, a look across the table, a decision announced before discussion. None of them seemed large enough to damage a marriage. Together they taught her where not to place her honest thoughts. I asked whether she forgave me. She said she had forgiven me many times. Forgiveness, she explained, was not the same as feeling safe enough to try again. That distinction stayed with me. People speak of forgiveness as though it returns everything to its former place. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes a broken chair is forgiven for breaking, but no one sits in it again. Ruth lived 11 months after that night. Her heart weakened slowly. She tired after walking from the kitchen to the porch. By autumn, I was doing most of the cooking. I burned the biscuits twice and learned that soup needs more salt than a man expects. Ruth sat at the table and directed me without mercy. That was one of the better parts of those months. She became less careful with small opinions. She told me when the coffee was weak. She told me when I had cut the potatoes too large. She told me that one of my stories had already been told 3 times. Each correction felt like a gift. Once near Christmas, I asked why she had not spoken to me this plainly when we were young. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You are easier to speak to now," she said. "I wish I could tell you that I became the husband she needed before she died. That would make a cleaner story. I became better. That is true." I also interrupted her sometimes. I still offered solutions when she wanted understanding. I still felt the urge to defend a younger version of myself who could no longer be changed. 50 years of habit do not disappear because a man finally sees them. The difference was that I began to notice. When I interrupted, I stopped and asked her to continue. When I defended myself, I later returned and admitted it. When she grew quiet, I did not assume the subject was finished. Small things, late things, too late for much of what mattered. There is a particular grief in becoming capable of giving something after the person has grown tired of asking for it. Ruth died in early spring. The ground was still hard in shaded places, but the first crocuses had come up beside the house. She was in our bed. The window was open a little because she wanted fresh air. I sat beside her with one hand around hers. We did not speak about old wrongs that morning. She asked whether the hens had been fed. I said yes. She asked whether Miriam was coming. I said she was already on the road. Then Ruth looked at me for a long while. Her eyes were tired but clear. I told her I was sorry that I had learned so late. She said, "You learned." Those were not her final words, but they were the last ones she gave me about our marriage. After she died, the house changed sound. That is the only way I can describe it. Empty houses are not silent. They creak more loudly. The stove ticks as it cools. Wind enters places you never noticed before. Every object seems to remember the hand that used it. For months, I kept finding evidence of Ruth's life. A thimble in the sewing drawer, a grocery note folded inside a recipe book, 3 buttons in a little glass dish, her apron hanging behind the pantry door. I also found a small bundle of letters tied with string. They were letters she had written but never sent. Some were to her sister. One was to Miriam during the shunning. 2 were addressed to me. I did not read them for several days. When I finally did, I sat at the same kitchen table where she had told me the truth. The first letter had been written after Samuel's birth. She described the darkness. She wrote that she loved our children but feared there was something missing in her soul. She wrote that she wanted me to sit beside her without telling her what to do. The second letter was written many years later. It was not angry. That made it harder. She wrote that she had stopped expecting certain conversations from our marriage. She said she did not blame me entirely. She had chosen silence because it kept the days moving. But she wondered whether peace that required one person to remain unknown was truly peace. I folded the letters and placed them back in the bundle. There was nothing to fix. No apology could travel backward. No new habit could reach the young woman standing by the stove in a shawl, trying to tell her husband she was not well. No act of kindness in my 70s could sit beside her in that winter bedroom while Samuel cried. That is what I mean when I say I was too old to fix it. I do not mean an old man cannot change. He can. I changed. I mean some truths arrive after the years they might have saved. There are people who hear a story like this and say a marriage of 51 years must have been successful because it lasted. I understand that thought. Endurance has value. Loyalty has value. Staying through hardship has value. But length alone does not tell you whether two people were fully known. A barn can stand for 100 years while water slowly rots one hidden beam. You do not call the barn false because most of it remains strong. You also do not ignore the beam once you find it. Ruth and I had a real marriage. We loved each other. We raised children. We laughed. We worked. We forgave. We also failed each other in ways that took decades to name. Both things are true. At my age, I have become suspicious of stories that divide a life into good and bad. Most lives are not so tidy. A man can be faithful and still fail to listen. A woman can love her family and still feel trapped inside herself. A community can offer belonging and still lack language for certain kinds of suffering. Truth does not always destroy what came before. Sometimes it simply makes the picture complete. I wish Ruth had told me sooner. More honestly, I wish I had been the kind of man she could tell. That is the thought I carry now. When one of my grandchildren comes to me with something difficult, I try not to answer too quickly. I have learned to let the silence remain. Younger people sometimes need an old man's advice. More often they need proof that their words will not be punished, corrected, or explained away before they have finished speaking. It took me nearly a lifetime to understand that listening is not waiting for your turn to be wise. Listening is making room for the truth before it becomes a secret. That is all I would say about it. A person you love may be carrying words they have tested against your face many times. Make your face kinder. Make your answers slower. Do not assume silence means peace. Some things can still be repaired while both people are sitting at the table. Thank you for sitting with me through this memory. If stories from a long Amish life mean something to you, you are welcome to subscribe and return. And I would like to ask you one question before you go. What is something you wish you had listened to sooner?